everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Henry Dow with the Water Restoration Group, and we are here to talk about hurricane preparedness. I've got some very special guests that are going to chime in and answer some questions for us. We have Jason Rodgers Da-Cruz from Siegfried Rivera. We have Juan Magdaleno from USI Insurance, and we have Dan Odess from GlobalPro. As you know, this hurricane season seems to be that it's going to be a very busy one. They're predicting between 13 and 19 named storms and 3 to 6 major hurricanes. So we want to kind of talk about the before, the during, the after, and go over some items that we believe as experts in our fields are mishandled or forgotten during these situations. So I wanted to let my guests introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with this. And then if you have any questions, you can put it in the Q&A section, and we'll get them answered at the end or during this presentation. Okay, so Jason, why don't we get started with you?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Henry. My name is Jason Rodgers Da-Cruz. I am a shareholder with the law firm of Siegfried Rivera. Siegfried Rivera has been around for over 40 years. We are a community association, real estate, and construction law firm. We also have a first-party practice group that prosecutes property damage claims. And I've been practicing law as a trial attorney for approximately 20 years, which is almost half of my life at this point, which is kind of crazy to me. But we certainly work with the Water Restoration Group and GlobalPro and addressing all of community association problems, especially with regard to property damage type claims. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. We'll go to Juan Magdaleno, also known as JC.
More affectionately referred to as JC. JC Magdaleno with USI Insurance, part of the condo team. We are the largest property broker in the state of Florida, with roughly about 1,500 associations that we represent. Anything from the Keys all the way up to Jacksonville and the Panhandle. Been in the business for 4 years already. So
thank you
for having us.
Thank you, JC. And Mr. Dan Odess, the one and only.
Well, thank you guys. And thank you, Henry, for allowing me the opportunity to be a part of this esteemed panel. Definitely worked closely with all of you in dealing with some major disasters and some small ones. But in any event, Dan Odess with GlobalPro, we're a leader in insurance services. We primarily focus our efforts in advocating for policyholders when they experience a loss from either a first party or third party. And we want to make sure that our clientele gets what they need when they need it. And being available to our clientele 24/7, 365 days a year is essential to ensuring that we continue to add the more than $1 billion worth of loss that we have helped manage and recover for our clientele. And most of that is for community associations. So our team is actively on the ground every day working with property managers and their advisors to ensure that they not only get the insurance they need, but they recover what they're entitled to from those policies.
Excellent. Excellent. And just a little history of Dan and myself. I used to be an insurance adjuster back in the day, and
yeah,
I always tell this story. I used to
like to admit that.
Perfect.
I used to go against Dan, and I used to hate it because Dan's very. I used to always say it's like the little dog that bites your ankle and just doesn't let go.
I think I'm a big dog. I like to think I'm a big dog. Yeah.
So,
it's not going to get contentious, is it?
Not anymore.
so
That its moments.
Definitely someone to think about if you're having trouble with your insurance carrier and your settlement. So I want to get started, talking about prior to the hurricane and the preparation that needs to go into this. So while we're on it, why don't you just tell us what you like to tell your clients? Because I know people think of you as the guy who comes in after there's a problem with the claim, and I know you always argue that it shouldn't be that way. So why don't you tell all the managers that are online or board members what you recommend as far as preparation when it comes to your industry?
Yeah, and I preach, practice preparation and making sure that you have what you need when the loss occurs. And the reason is because that first 72 hours following any loss, and it doesn't have to be major. It's literally any loss. And whether those damages were caused by something on site or something off site, like a hurricane or construction, something like that, you want someone there advocating for you from day one, making sure that you're collecting all the relevant information for your claims. Also making sure that your contractors are where they need to be and are doing what they are supposed to be doing, and drafting paperwork correctly and including the appropriate causes of loss, or ensuring that they're not overstating what it is that you're trying to recover for, because we see a lot of litigation and issues arise from things that could have been avoided early in the claims process. And some of those is because of, you have some of these bad acting contractors, or maybe it's just a legitimate mistake, but catching those mistakes and avoiding them early on is essential to making sure that you both save time and money. And as a property manager, you are very limited on time, and your reserves are limited on money, and you want to make sure that you have everything you're entitled to recover in your possession, so that when you do go to make those repairs, you don't have shortfalls in the actual scope of work and the work that needs to be done. We're seeing a huge spike in claims being brought against community associations by either the homeowners insurance or unit owners when there's losses that are occurring. And liability insurance, and JC can speak to this, and I'm sure Jason's seen plenty of it, are in defense mode like crazy, and GL rates are going way up. And I've seen the litigation go skyrocketing. So you can avoid a lot of that stuff by having someone like us there on the ground, making sure that you're collecting everything else and notifying people appropriately. These incident reports or accord forms that I see a lot of managers fill out and submit are riddled with all kinds of misinformation. Whether it's for everything down to the wrong unit numbers, to not including unit numbers, or maybe overstating it. And then a lack of photographic evidence of the damages, the broken pipe that the plumber, dry fit, missing, gone, not properly tagged and collected and kept at the property manager's office and literally in a safe at this point. That literally could be your entire key to whether or not you can defend yourself against a claim being brought against you by a unit owner, and also whether or not your own insurance company is going to pay you, because they can allege prejudice and then deny your claim entirely. So it's really, really important that there's so many steps, and as the insurance becomes more expensive and provides less coverage, or to obtain that coverage, it requires more steps and more things for you to comply with. I think people are wising up to the fact that you have the card stacked against you. The insurance company's representatives, the adjuster that comes out, is not your representative. I can't tell you how many times I say, oh yeah, our adjuster already came out here, but now we're thinking about bringing on another adjuster. I'm like, well, wait, who? They're not there for you, and they're there for the insurance company. It's not to say that they're bad people, but they do have a claims manual that they adhere to and follow, and that's how they get paid. So, and sometimes that claims manual dictates a process that's maybe different than what's inside your actual policy or the Florida law allows for. So we want to make sure that they're complying with those things, and we want to make sure that you're doing everything you can do to protect your interests in that very short window in the beginning of the claims process.
Yeah, so just, I always tell my customers, my managers, your service is just like anybody else. I mean, if you need a construction job, you don't try to do it in-house. You hire the people that do construction. And the same thing applies to handling a claim. Handling a claim is very, very intensive, comprehensive. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So I always recommend that you hire someone to help you through that process, and it's a no-lose situation.
Let me add on to that.
In your recovery. DC, go ahead.
Yeah, let me add on to that. It's also to have your team in place before the storm hits, or any kind of situation where you have familiarity with people that you're doing business with, that know your building, that know what kind of damages you may have. They're just, it's a comfort level that they already know what they're walking into.
Correct. Okay, thank you, JC. Jason, I wanted to move on to you. Anything you can tell our customers for planning?
Absolutely. And to echo what Dan said, it's very important that you don't overstate the claim, because then you lose a lot of credibility. And you'll lose credibility in the eyes of the insurance company. You'll lose credibility in the eyes of the membership of the association. So overstating the claim, for example, if you think you have a $12 million claim and it's really properly adjusted a $9 million claim, that's an expectation that's created, and that's a huge problem as well. So it needs to be accurate. It needs to be thoroughly vetted, and that's important. But stepping back to what can be done and some of the things that we recommend pre-hurricane is, number one, review your policy. It's a contract, like any other contract. Understand what the contract obligates you to do. Number two, some of the challenges, excuse me, that I've seen or dealt with is business records of the association, for example. How are they preserving their records? I find that, it's very difficult, even for either public adjusters or even if the file comes to us where we end up prosecuting the claim, is to recreate, where are these documents, where are the photographs, where are the videos, where is all the electronically stored information? And so the carriers will ask for all of this information. You might as well be prepared and physically stored in a safe place with regard to your hard copies, and with regard to electronically stored information, make sure that's properly stored as well, because carriers will ask for emails, they'll ask for board emails, they'll ask for complaints by unit owners. So be prepared for that and be proactive in that approach. With regard to, who's the team that's going to document it? Obviously, like Dan's group, for example, you bring them in, they come in very quickly and they start documenting the claim, but who's handling it while the hurricane is transpiring? Who's out there making sure we're mitigating our damages, making sure that we're making, the property safe, who's responsible for photographing the common areas of the community association as a property manager. All of that needs to be dealt with in advance. So by the time it comes down to adjusting the claim, hopefully all these documents are properly stored. And there's a lot of evidence there that can be shared with, for example, Dan's group as a public adjuster.
Thank you, Jason. JC, anything on your end for preparation? Hasn't been touched on?
I'm going to echo their sentiment. Just pretty much review your policies from the standpoint of, you want to see what your limits are on the policy. Make sure you have your appraisals up to date and your limits are in line with your appraisal. Number two, you want to check your sublimits on your policies as well as your deductibles. My biggest driver I've seen on agents doing the wrong things is to save premium, they normally do what's called a named storm deductible as opposed to a hurricane deductible. So when we look at deductibles, you have the hurricane deductible or the named storm. You have all other wind, and you have your garden variety, fires, and then broken glass or whatever it is. We're looking at probably normally $5,000, $25,000, and then based on your named storm or hurricane deductible, now we're in a ballpark where we're taking a step back. We're going to look at a hurricane only applies to the value of the building, a percentage of the value of the building. A named storm can be a tropical depression, a tropical storm, and a hurricane as well. So from a cash flow standpoint, the association, which is very stringent nowadays, with the rates going up on the general liability market as well as the property market, it's important to you that you spend a couple extra dollars for the right kind of coverage to make sure that you're not being bound by or handcuffed down the road. I mean, Dan can pretty much attest to that.
Good point. And I've had these conversations with JC before, and it is, the board members are looking to save money, and insurance is one of your biggest expenses. And since it's not hurricane season, it's easy to say, hey, let's save some money on this premium and change this deductible to whatever number it is. So, but then when the storm comes and hits, and then you have the issue, then there's people complaining about, why do I have this deductible? So
yeah,
very important for managers to look at your deductible. If it's a percentage, go ahead and put that in dollar figures and know exactly what that is to make sure that you're able to cover that. And if not, how are you going to prepare to cover that?
And your sublimits and your endorsements. I mean, one of the biggest ones that we see with hurricanes is wind-driven rain.
Yeah, I'm gonna touch on that subject in a second. I know Dan likes that subject as well. So I'll talk on from our end, from WRG. Same thing that every panelist has said, is just preparation. Who's going to be called out when the hurricane hits? Do you have a contract with them already? Do you have pricing that's agreed upon already? That's very important, because when a hurricane hits and you don't have a contract of some sort or a preferred client agreement of some sort, then, you know, you're at the bottom of the list. And sometimes you end up having to use a contractor from out of town that just came in to make money quick and go. So just make sure you prepare in that sense. So since we touched on the subject of wind-driven rain, that's something that I've been curious about, Dan. You know, I know at some point I heard, and I don't know if this is true, that they did cover wind-driven rain. But I've always known it as something that's excluded unless there's an opening created in the building. So can you elaborate on that subject, since I know a hurricane, when it comes through, you're going to have water seeping into the building?
Well, yeah, you're definitely going to have water damage, more than likely if your window system or doors fail. And I think that's the big difference between what an insurance company would define as wind-driven rain versus what is hurricane damage. And it's an ongoing debate. It's certainly something being argued in many different lawsuits now. And I can tell you that when we tested many different insurance companies, the biggest ones still writing condo policies here in Florida on this issue of the difference between a wind-driven rain claim and water damage from a failed window system or a door system, we obtained recovery, millions upon millions of dollars for it. Because the fact of the matter is that unlike the anti-concurrent causation issue of, let's say, a flood and hurricane, where there's this argument which one came first or how one contributes to another, the fact is that your windows were not designed to leak, all right? They were, and if you have water in your building during a hurricane, something had to fail on those windows. Now, there arguably may be some pre-existing issue that had led to it, and that should have been documented prior to the loss occurring. And most insurance companies will only make that argument after you've made a claim for millions of dollars in damages to your windows, doors, and interior as a result of the hurricane. So it's a little of what's called post-loss underwriting. So to not fall victim of that post-loss underwriting, we encourage all of our clientele to obviously maintain your building. And keep records as Jason touched on, because the first thing they do is they go to look in those records to see what are you doing to maintain your building and who's complaining about what. And if you have 100 complaints in there over the last several years about windows leaking and whistling and all these other things, well, you certainly had some type of pre-existing issue if you have it in an enormous. Now, if you have an isolated event where one door or one window or something happened, then it's certainly not a pre-existing issue. And if you can show that there was a report of an issue and you went ahead and maintained it, then you've mitigated the issue. And certainly if your window now fails because of the hurricane, it's certainly different than what it was. And by the way, before 2017, no one even used the phrase wind-driven rain. And most people who made claims after Hurricane Irma, when they were told that they were limited or excluded from coverage, had never even heard of it and didn't even know that that exclusion or limitation was in their policy. And it was kind of like a shocking moment, similar to the way the business industry is seeing how their pandemic claims are getting, denied or limited right now, where they were like shocked that, oh my God, I'm not covered for something like this. So I think, both everyone's kind of touched on having a copy of your policy is so important, but also reviewing the policy and asking questions of your brokers. JC team is very adept and knowledgeable of the entire market because of how big the company is and how much they write. They got so many policies from so many different places coming at them all the time. So they're seeing all kinds of trends way before we even see it. So take the time to actually sit down and stop price shopping as much as you should be shopping for the product, not the price of the product. So once you find the product that you actually need, then you can start comparing apples to apples and looking at a price for it. Because if you start doing it the other way around, you're going to end up in an apples and orange situation. And then you end up with a shock to your system like we had after the 2017 storms with all of these claims, some type of limitation argument or exclusion for winter. I even saw engineering firms adopting the phrase wind-driven rain in their reports. Engineers that were hired by community associations to come out and document the hurricane damage. It's like, and they're like, yeah, and their whole report is about the hurricane damage. And then they're using the idea of wind-driven rain to describe water in a building from the hurricane, not knowing that the policy itself defines wind-driven rain as something other than the hurricane most often. Sometimes there's a little perverted language in there regarding if it's caused by a hurricane or not, or whatever it is. But the fact is that there's no clear explanation or case law that I'm aware of right now that that distinguishes between the damage you may see from a hurricane and the failure of window and water in the interior, and how that would be the same as the wind driven rain that the insurance companies intended to exclude as coverage in your policy. So I think really understand it, and this is a complex argument and certainly something that can go woof way over your head real quick. But the fact is that we bought a hurricane policy, has a massive, huge 14 size capital letter about your deductible on there. Where was the huge 14 capital letter boldface disclaimer that, hey, by the way, if you get water in your building, we're never going to pay for it? Because even where I had broken windows on buildings, I still had insurance companies trying to claim that the water on the inside was still limited or excluded. So I think it's because people didn't really actually know how to apply the exclusion, and there was no discussion about it before 2017. So it's certainly a pitfall. There's many more, but making sure that don't act as an expert. It's one of my big mistake things that I see all the time, is that as managers or board members, we try to be experts, and it's not your place. I mean, you had a hurricane. There was a hurricane, and now you have damage. That's it. Just talk about the hurricane damage. No reason to try to use language, fancy, fun language to describe it.
Because they get paid so much as board members, right?
What's that?
They get paid so much as board members.
You're getting paid. You're giving me nothing, and Jason's just seen it. I mean, Jason, how many times do you see people step into mud when they should just keep their mouth shut? It's like,
all the time. And that, I have I'm not going to mention anything in particular, but I have seen situations where, we have a pretty good claim. We're moving forward with the claim. It's well documented, and you'll find some internal fighting among board members. You'll find fighting between unit owners and board members. And then ultimately, you'll find that the carrier wants to get a hold of some of that documentation or some of those complaints. And it's really not helpful at all. The objective is to develop a good claim, an accurate claim, to make sure it's well supported. And a lot of the internal fighting is just, it creates all these satellite issues. And of course, carriers love satellite issues, right? They love it. They love the diversion, look over here. And it makes our job a little bit harder. And it's just, it's obnoxious, but it's very, very hard to handle. But yes, we should talk to our clients about that and focus on the objective.
Thank you. And JC, I mean, let's say we wanted to cover all bases. I mean, does a wind-driven rain endorsement even exist?
Yes. The biggest challenge we're seeing now is what the limits are, and certain carriers have higher limits than others. And honestly, it doesn't move the needle that much on premium as you would think it would. The devil's in the details, by the way. All these policies are their own forms of verbiage changes from company to company. And it's just diving down, and it's normally hidden in page 355 of the policy. And it's just sitting down and hammering down. And an expert agent knows what to look for. And with our experience, I mean, we find this in a heartbeat. We know what to look for.
Okay. So inevitably, COVID-19 is going to come up in every discussion or webinar that we have nowadays. So I wanted to turn to Jason. I know you're giving some seminars on how this has changed life a little bit when it comes to our industries. So wanted to see if you can tell us a little bit about the preparation and how that's changing due to the COVID-19.
Sure. So one of the biggest issues that we are confronted with, whether it be in the first party context or one of our other construction type cases, is just access to the property. And so obviously you have to deal with the CDC requirements, you have to deal with the OSHA requirements, you have to deal with state and local requirements. And then on top of that, you've got to deal with the community association regulations. And what I'm seeing with regard to community associations is, how are we keeping our membership safe? And how are we following these guidelines? And are we allowing people within the common corridors, the common elements of the property? Are we allowing people within the units to look at, say, for example, certain deficiencies or water damage? So it's fluid. It's always changing. And every association has something a bit different, and they have guidelines and policies in place. But it certainly complicates things because, you know, if you want to get an inspection done and you have to get into the units, and typically maybe you could do, you know, a full inspection of a 150 unit condominium association within a week or 2 weeks. Now you've compounded it with COVID-19. You know, how are you going to bring in the people? Are they going to be wearing masks and gloves? Do the unit owners feel comfortable with it? Where are they going to access it? Are they going to scrub down or sanitize the area when they leave? And so it's someone's home, and it makes it very complicated. So from that perspective, it is difficult to work through, and it will always be difficult to work through.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for us, for example, we're having that issue, and it's just not just we as the vendor, but we see it as an issue for the association in the sense that we have a building that's flooded. We're trying to get into a certain unit, and those people in that unit are quarantined, and they just don't want to come out. They don't want to see anybody,
right?
Or, you know, so it puts the building in a situation to where, what do we do now? We're going to leave your walls wet, and the drywall's owned by the association. Now, the next thing you know, there's a mold issue, you know, so how do you handle these situations? It's just getting tough.
Yeah, and it turns into, especially the mold issue, because you come in and you mitigate the damages right away. And you dry the area out, and you want to keep that microbial growth from growing, obviously, because once it starts growing, you know how that turns out. It keeps going and going and going. And so every association is, confronted with that. How do we get in? Hopefully a lawsuit doesn't have to be filed, seeking some sort of relief in order to access the property. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully we can convince unit owners that we can come in, clean up the units for the benefit of everyone, and then get out and make them feel comfortable about it. So a lot of education is part of that.
Yeah.
A lot of education.
Dan, what have you seen out on your end with this topic?
Well, one of the important things to consider is from the an adjusting side of it is, okay, one on valuation of claims, the other one on process. On the valuation side, PPE gear is part of the process now. It's not something else. And it should be built into the total cost of mitigating a water, or a fire, or a hurricane claim. The biggest mistake contractors can make is actually creating a separate category for that gear. It's certainly no longer something extra. It's something that is required. And in having your policies in place prior to the hurricane season and being consistent with the execution of that will ensure that you get a recovery that includes those costs. And if you find an insurance company excluding coverage for it, then we have an argument for it, and you should get, without a doubt, should get paid for that increased cost because that is the new normal. It's not rolling back. In fact, we're seeing a spike in cases now. So more than ever, we need to be vigilant and making sure that we're protecting our unit owners from each other, basically. Because the last thing you want to be doing is calling your lawyer because you're getting sued by unit owners because they feel as if you let contractors onto the property that weren't wearing PPE gear, and then you got sick with COVID, and that God forbid someone dies in your family, like things, and always think extreme worst case scenario. The other one is touching on process, is making sure that you are consistent in the execution of it and enforcing it the same across the board, and so that we have a resource to go back and look at. But that also is for the insurance companies, individuals who come onto the site as well. Don't think that just because they're working for the insurance companies that they can go do whatever they want and you have to comply with their desires, right? If your association has procedures in place to protect unit owners for their health and safety, then the insurance company adjusters need to do the same. And I've run into a recent situation where that was not the case, where an adjuster was demanding access to the property, threatening the association for refusing access, but that adjuster didn't have any protective gear, didn't have alcohol wipes, didn't have face masks, didn't have any of that stuff, but demanded access to the property, and with the threat of, if you don't let me on, then we can deny your claim. Now, you know what? Go ahead and do that. You're a bad actor. We'll make sure that at the end of the day that you pay for what you're doing, and you're delaying our claim process at that point. But also keep in mind, though, that there are some insurance companies and adjusters that, although it's an essential business, insurance as a whole services have been deemed to be essential. Some of them are still refusing to actually come out and do inspections. And the reality is that they have a duty and obligation to conduct their own investigation, and you have a duty and obligation, obviously, to prove your damages. But at the same time, you need to make sure that they're getting everything they want. And I'm seeing some insurance companies actually put that onus on the policyholder and that burden on them to prove their damages as well as to do their investigation. And it's a real tricky area because if you don't have your policy, don't know how to navigate it. We talked about a very complex issue before about wind-driven rain and some of the confusion of that. And it was kind of like, I'm sure it went over some people's heads because you're not an insurance expert, not because you're not a smart person, right? So, and now you're supposed to go find what they need to find in order to pay your claim, and that's the only way that you're going to get paid. You saw some insurance companies, oh my gosh, we're closing office, going to virtual inspections. It's going to trickle down to your premiums and save you money. Well, it may, the reason why you have insurance is to protect you in case something happens. Since when was insurance about saving money? Okay, that's not the case, right? So, and what am I actually saving? I mean, is it really trickling down to me, or is it not? I'm seeing massive rate increases. I'm not seeing any trickle down economics there. So, so be vigilant and stick to your process and make sure it's in writing. Make sure everyone knows it. Everything down to the person controlling your shipping docks, to your front office people, to your concierge people. Make sure everyone knows, and have a process for reporting bad actors, and that could be insurance company representatives, and holding them to what they're supposed to be doing, and making sure they're not prejudicing you also in your recovery by not including those costs associated with the new normal.
Okay.
And I can add to that just with one quick point. This goes back to the preparation, because now we know we're in a very sensitive environment. And I think every association needs, obviously we're gearing up for the hurricane season, and we need to be prepared for what Dan talked about, which is access to the property. And how are we going to deal with that beforehand? And it can't be just, maybe it can, but it can't just be, hey, I'm not allowing access to anyone. It doesn't matter. If you're a third-party vendor, you can't allow access on the property. I've seen some of that and some discussion about that, and that just doesn't work. But if you have obviously property damage and you have people that need to get in, that goes to the well-being of the entire association and its members. So that needs to be put in place before the hurricane. Everyone listening out there, as opposed to this knee-jerk reaction, like, oh my goodness, we have property damage. What do we do? How do we get people together? So-and-so on the board is somewhere else. Then we need to set up a board meeting and set up this protocol. And, we have this group that wants to come in, but, you've got to prepare for all of that stuff in advance and try to make it it's not going to go perfectly, but that preparation will help streamline that,
Absolutely. And we know managers are I've always said it's the toughest job out there. The boards expect you to know everything, no insurance, no restoration, no construction, very busy people. But I can't stress enough that point of planning, hurricane planning meeting needs to start happening in February every week, for who knows how many weeks, because there's a lot to think about when it comes to this. As far as our industry goes in the water mitigation, COVID-19 has affected us in the sense that obviously things get done slower, and some managers forget this and say, why are the guys taking so long? Well, because I can only put 2 guys in that elevator, or, it's just everything takes a little longer to get done, and that's what we have to deal with. But to what you were saying, Jason, is just, how about putting your plan together and giving it to your vendors prior to the hurricane? Look, if I call you out to this building, here are my regulations. This is what we expect of you. This is what you can do, and this is what you cannot do.
Right.
That way your vendors can be held accountable for their actions when they go out there. But if you just call us on an emergency situation, get out here and help me, I don't know what your rules are. So we got to go and work under our rules, and those might be conflicting with your rules. So
a very good point. Very good point.
Yeah. So definitely part of the preparation, giving your vendors the information and giving your vendors, we like to, we actually prepare the letters for our associations. Just here's a letter that your association can sign, giving us access and authorization to go to your building. Because many times you'll find that the streets are closed or they haven't blocked. But if you show them a letter saying, you know, we're going to this building, we have authorization to do so, they let us through. And this happened in Irma, and that was very helpful for us to have those letters done.
Yeah, and also for the property managers listening to this right now, you're going to have angry unit owners, right? They're going to be angry about, you know, I'm seeing water in the hallways, water in the corridors. You know, we saw, for example, WRG come out and they weren't allowed in. And why was that the case? Well, they didn't have protective gear and everything that we needed. And then you lose those hours and that time or that day. And it's critical, right? You want to be prepared for that. And then you can mitigate, number one, on the unit owner side, the complaints, and the unit owners look at it and say, okay, they let them in, they're doing what they need to do. They've worked with Henry's group. They know what they need to do and what those regulations are. And I agree with you 100%. 100%.
Correct. Yeah, and then this becomes very subjective. You know, if that plan is not taken care of, you know, the manager might feel like we're doing what needs to be done and everything's fine with him, but there might be a board member that sees us and says, wait a minute, these guys are not following what protocol I expect to be followed. So
right.
That needs to be agreed to beforehand. JC, wanted to ask you on, you kind of touched on this, but I don't know if there are any endorsements that you think are worth paying attention to. I know during the hurricanes, there's, you know, I had mentioned too, landscaping endorsements and that kind of stuff, that these buildings spend a ton of money on landscaping, and then you find yourself with a, you know, with a limit of $1,500.
Lost you, Henry.
Make a claim.
Some of the endorsements that I like to look for on policies and to make sure that they're there is wind-driven rain, number one. Ordinance of law, that whenever you do have an issue, that you are compliant with whatever state or county codes. May come back and bite you in the rear without you even thinking about it. Landscaping, I mean, insurance is not there. It's to pay for all your issues, but it is there to kind of help you from a balance sheet standpoint and make sure that we get back to a pre-law status. I mean, I think that's pretty much all of our goals as far as us four on this panel. Something else, debris removal, where normally you may have a limit of $10,000, which, Henry, you know well where that's not going to be enough for a lot of these issues. Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to chime in with some other?
I think a big one that sewer backup, drain backups, with all of this crazy rain we're having. I can't tell you how many times, you know, when the pool decks, on the elevated pool decks and the drains that are on there, and there's damage on the interior. You know, sometimes, you know, with just that simple coverage written in a certain way, it's either applicable or it's not. In the event that it is applicable to that type of claim, then you're looking at typically a very limited situation, which could be extensive damage. I've seen 20 stories of damage from a drain on a balcony. But sometimes it doesn't apply as well, and it's not a flood. I can't tell you how many times people report that claim as a flood, by the way. It's not. It's 4 floors up, 20 floors up. It's not a flood. And it's also not surface water. That's the only thing that the insurance companies like to deny it for and exclude it for, not surface water. Okay.
Words mean something. Words mean something.
Yes,
right?
yes, they do. Yeah. When a pipe breaks in a unit, not a flood either.
Right.
So, you know, I think that's important. And also, I think JC, something we're seeing with some of our mutual clients is these massive water deductibles, and some of in those instances, and that's typically the highest reported claim that we see. Are water losses, and you're having huge deductibles. So making sure your reserves are properly set for that stuff, and getting with your contractor as well as your agent during renewal process is very important, because they can kind of give you some expectation of costs and saying, okay, should I go with the $25,000 or $50,000 deductible if I have a choice, obviously, or, you know, maybe even a lower one, maybe 10 grand, because that's now the new norm, right? So, and again, that's got to be considered in the budgets and the conversations and getting people there early on. Something Jason harped on earlier. So, get us involved in those conversations. And yeah, wind-driven rain. I mean, who knows what's next? They just keep coming up with other ways of writing these things. There was never an exclusion for a pandemic, and now all of a sudden in renewals in 2020, they're all in there, but somehow the virus exclusions applied to a pandemic from before. So who am I? So you never know what they're going to come up with.
So Dan, what are you finding? I mean, for these water sewer backups, do you see a limit that's pretty normal that you see across the board with these buildings, or no?
Yeah, you gotta have to look. You got to look at causation. When a toilet fails, it's not always a backup. Usually, there's a mechanical reason why a toilet fails, and where I see really like this issue in the pool deck drains is another big one, right? Categorically, for those two things, they're typically not backups as per the definition provided in the policy for sewer and drain line backups. A lot of times flappers are put on upside down, handles are inverted, the actual mechanical device, the plunger that actually turns on and off water, gets stuck in a down position or breaks. That's not a backup. Okay. So, and I find that people rush to fix the toilet, but don't actually document what was wrong with it in a way to prove an issue mechanically or a failure with the toilet, and just consider it a backup. And next thing you know, they're only getting $25,000 in coverage. So take the effort to actually investigate the actual causation and understand the limitations that may be there. And as well, we're experiencing a lot of rain, and the forecast is crazy for the rain over the next couple of weeks. So all of us will be very busy. And when you see situations like that, you got to, again, look very closely at that mechanical system or what contributing causes may have caused it. And if you don't have what's called anti-concurrent causation language, and it's something I touched on earlier, a very complex theory and issue, then you may be covered for the ensuing damage to the building. Okay. So, because maybe you're doing construction on your pool deck, which I see a lot of. And during construction on a pool deck, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll remove the waterproofing. And I know Jason's seen this, and then you go sue the contractor and everything else. Well, the ensuing damage to the building can be covered by your insurance policy, because it's caused because it started with construction, and the rain that occurred in no way was caused by the construction. You see how they're separate. They're two different events. They're not tied to each other. So there's a legal doctrine out there that allows us to pursue the ensuing damage. Now, the other consequential damages, you have to pursue it against your contractor, and then you get your legal counsel involved to make that third party claim. But the reality is that you need to look closely at the issues and create a very cause and effect timeline, and seeing how one has anything to do with the other. And if there's a break in the chain of those events, and the language in their policy allows for coverage, then you need to make it appropriately for those things. And you may incidentally overstate your claims simply because you lump in something that you actually are not covered for. Okay, so which again is going to cause delay, a potential denial, a partial denial, and a very confusing situation where you're not really sure why you're not getting paid for something in excess. And the last thing I'll say on that is ordinance or law. I can't tell you how important it is to look at your limits on ordinance or law. Don't just assume it is whatever it is. And I think when you're going through the insurance review process, looking at that with your broker, and understanding how that works. After Hurricane Irma, I can't tell you how many, while it was great that we're able to win the replacement of their windows for a significant section of the building, which then required the replacement of all the windows. They had $1 million to pay for all the rest of that, and it was not even close to what they needed. So then they ended up getting the $1 million from their insurance company, but then they got a special assess for all the money above and beyond that. And so it could have been a really very difficult situation. Even though you think you did everything you're supposed to and you got a great recovery and other people may not have, you still could have done better had you actually looked closely at those things. And if it's available, which is not always, adding that in there and understanding when to actually make a claim for it. fire pump explosions, things like that. I can't tell you how many times people are like, oh my God, my contractor says due to some issue, I need to replace the whole system now. And then they fight for that whole issue, but it's like, whoa, maybe it's obsolescence is the reason why you're doing it and not a law or ordinance issue. And those are totally two different issues and should not be limited by law and ordinance. So obsolescence versus elevators with flood claims is where we see it a lot, where they want to do an improvement project. Well, we actually start asking about it, and it's really not an improvement project. It's that you have serial ports on your call buttons, and now they're using like HDMI or some other type of connection, and it's the only one available. And then they want to take some used part off a shelf somewhere where it has no certification or anything else, shove it in your, and then now you're liable for when the elevator falls or doesn't work. And then you're just like kicking the can, and the insurance company got off by not having to pay for the, substantial replacement of the system. So there's a lot to consider there.
Okay. Yeah, and I just wanted for those of you viewing this to understand what ordinance and law means, or give you an example, I guess, is if your building suffers physical damage to, let's say, 50% of the windows, and your insurance company is going to pay for that because they're damaged. But then the building department tells you, since you're replacing 50% of those windows, we got to replace all the windows in the building. At that point, if you don't have that coverage, your insurance policy is probably going to say, sorry, we're only going to pay for what's damaged. But if you do have ordinance and law coverage, then that's where whatever the building department says the extra or says that needs to be done, that's an extra expense that would be covered. So that's what Dan was referring to as ordinance and law. And then I wanted to mention the key terms, because we've talked about a few key terms, wind-driven rain, and that kind of stuff that it's funny, but at the same time, those terms are so important when you're reporting a claim that you gotta be careful, and that's why Dan always recommends you talk to him before you even report it, because whoever's taking the call is listening in for some key terms that can help them deny your claim. So just be careful with the words you use, and it'll help you in the long run. So I wanted to give everybody a chance to wrap up here, and we'll spend the next few minutes talking about what, if you have anything else that you want to mention, Jason, or if not, tell us what you can do for the associations before, during, and after the hurricane.
Yeah, absolutely.
In general.
So obviously we're general and trial counsel for hundreds of associations, and we help them through that process through, legally, what are they obligated to do legally? What are they, should they be doing? As general counsel, we advise them through that process, hurricane preparedness, policies, stuff like that. We also work very closely, after there's significant damage to property loss, hurricane damage, with public adjusters such as Dan. We work with Dan a lot, and it kind of, work together as a team almost. For example, you would come in, mitigate some of the damages, clean up the property, Dan gets involved, starts adjusting the claim, and we're there as part of that entire process. So we also get involved in, ultimately, if the claim it's settled during the adjustment process and it requires that it be prosecuted or litigated or a lawsuit filed, we get involved in that. And our first party practice group is a very good group, and we prosecute those claims aggressively. So.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. JC.
Oh, like I said in my intro, USI Insurance is a national company, but our condo team is local, and we represent 1,500 condos associations within the state. We're the largest of what we do. We're the largest writer for QBE, Everest, Empire, down the list, Lexington, go on and on and on. It's been a blessing to work with all of you, by the way, in some form or another. You guys have been fantastic, so kudos to you guys for what you guys do every day. Thank you very much. My clients are happy, and all our clients are happy with you guys. And we're here to help you guys out. Just, before, sit down, review your policies. And if your agent isn't doing it, reach out to me and I'll be happy to do it for them.
That's right. And JC works, as your broker. He's the liaison between you and the insurance company. So if you're not happy with something that's going on there, you call JC and he'll be your punching bag. And then if that doesn't work, we've got we've got the big dog, Dan. Dan, tell us how you help us before, during, and after the hurricane.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And my parting words, I'd give my top 3 tips to all property managers that deal with these situations. Document. You can never take too many pictures. And you're not taking the ones for social media. No one cares about the new shoes you're wearing. Take it from every angle possible, close up, far away. Just think about what it's, to be able to tell a story 8 months from now, what are you going to need to be able to do? So get out there, document. And also the number 2 tip is obtain access. Make sure you have access to all units in your entire building heading into the hurricane season, because the fact of the matter is that someone won't be there. And if you don't have keys or have proper access to get into units, and there is an inspection that needs to be done, or Henry's company needs to get out and to mitigate in order to stop the water from going from one floor to the next, it's going to create a problem for you, which, Jason is there to solve, but, and he can talk to to your rights. And you certainly need to consult with your attorney at that point to say, can I force access to these units, and what does that look like, especially in this new COVID world we live in. But make sure you have access, contact information for all those unit owners. In the event that there's a problem, being able to give proper notification to them is so important. I can't tell you how many claims were delayed and slowed down after Hurricane Irma, just because we could only get into about half the units that were affected, or maybe even less. And the last thing I would say is obtain a certified copy of the policy. I preach this all the time. It's the third and top tip that I have for all property managers. The copy of the policy you have from your broker once you bound the insurance is that. It's a copy of the policy. Request a certified copy of the policy. JC, can provide you valuable information about that. What it is on the cover of that policy, it's the insurance company swearing that the policy they are providing to you is the full and accurate policy for your building and will protect you. And why that's important is so that you don't find yourself without certain forms or information. And if it's not included in that, it's arguably not included. So it's a pretty good way to make sure that you know what you have. It's almost like getting the keys to the car, but not getting the car. Okay. So let's get the car, because that's the whole reason why you bought it in the first place. So get the keys to the car, get the car itself by getting the certified copy of the policy. So you know what you're driving and you get the feel for it before the event happens. So there's no surprises. That's really, really happy. And the last thing I want to leave you with is deductible phobia. Stop it. Just because you have the deductible doesn't mean you shouldn't give prompt notice of your claim. Don't try to figure it out afterwards. Don't say, oh, let's see how much our damages are before we give notice. If you're not sure what your claims or damages are, it's a pretty good opportunity to pick up the phone and call us. It's a pretty good reason. And because the only one who's going to be able to do a proper valuation is someone like us. We have the experts on staff that can do that. We have licensed attorneys, licensed contractors, licensed engineers at our disposal that will go out there. We don't litigate. We're not a law firm. That's what Jason and Siegfried Rivera do. What we're there to do is just make sure that you are complying with your policy and that you understand your obligations under that policy and want to look at your entitlements and what you can actually get paid for. And so that's why we have those individuals there, to make sure that they can go through the policy with you, make sure you have everything that you need, and then work for you to setting that recovery. I want to thank all you guys for allowing me to be a part of this. Big fan of every one of you. Do have a lot of clientele in common, and we see each other out there all the time. So I wish everyone well, stay healthy, and thank you, WRG, for having us on.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. So I'll wrap this up with what I recommend to you guys. I mean, you guys touched on, or not to you guys, to the community managers and board members, and you guys touched on a couple of those things. One is keys, which was mentioned. We find that many times you go to open one of these condos for access and the wrong key, right? People change these locks, the locks sit on the doors many times, and you don't even know about it. So yeah, you need to check those. Prepare, plan. Like I said, start in February with having weekly meetings regarding the planning, and having your instructions for your vendors that are going to come in, have those done beforehand, so you're not trying to figure this out during the hurricane. It's hard enough for us. All we need to focus on is restoration, and even then it becomes a nightmare when a hurricane hits. I can't imagine for a manager who has to worry about 8 million things in a building. So planning is very key. And I'm honored to have you guys on here, and thank you very much for this, and thank you all who attended. And let's just hope for no hurricanes this year. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.